So thank you so much for being here. I'm Lisa Clark. I'm Director of Climate Action Engagement at the School for Environment and Sustainability, and I'm also working with the Office of the Vice Provost for Sustainability and Climate Action right now. So really happy to see everybody here in such a full room for this important conversation. We're all brought together by the Herb Institute, which many of you are, of course, familiar with. But for those of you who might not be, it's a 30-year-old organization at the university that sits between the MBA school, the Ross School of Business, and the School for Environment and Sustainability, and produces some really talented students. Not only the crop, some of which you all are here right now, but also a really deep alumni network, which is really phenomenal. A lot of leaders, frankly, globally, working in the area of sustainability and many other areas as well. So really excited to be having this conversation here today. And we're fortunate to have two really deep professionals here with you for the conversation. And so first I'd like to introduce somebody who's familiar to all of you, Professor Charlene Zietsma, who is the director of the Herb Institute. Charlene has a deep pedigree in this space, and those of you that have already worked with her know how talented she is and how much she brings to the table in the course of these corporate sustainability conversations. I've known Charlene maybe a little over, no, I guess it's almost 2 years now, and we started at the university about the same time. And I have to say, it's just been such a pleasure to work with her, and I'm sure that all of you have found that to be true in your capacities as well. And Charlene is going to be interviewing the one and only Tom Steyer, which I suspect is part of the reason you're here today. Not that, Charlene, we all love you, don't get me wrong. But we're thrilled to be able to host Tom Steyer here on campus. So Tom and I actually go way back, just kidding. We met maybe 10 years ago. And I have to say that I've always been really impressed with his philosophy around the energy transformation and the economic transformation. And I think the title of his latest book, Cheaper, Faster, Better, is captures exactly why we're going to continue to see the energy transition that we're seeing not only in the United States but across the globe. When I started in this work, maybe close to 20 years ago, we were seeing solar as no question the most expensive energy source. It's come down 90% in cost since when I started in this work. Initially, I think that solar was really looked at as the Whole Foods type of electricity, and now it's really the Costco type of electricity. But I think Tom's philosophy is exactly what captures why we're seeing that rapid transformation. And while there is going to be a bit of a change as we see policy gears shift, the markets will continue to make this work happen and continue this transition along the path that we're on already. And a lot of this, frankly, is due to early work that he has done. I say early because it's earlier than now, but to set the table for the path that we're on, not only in the U.S., but also across the globe. So really excited to hear what Tom has to say here today and to welcome this conversation between he and Professor Zietsma. So thank you.
Thank you. Just a mic check. I guess we should have done that before, but
I turned mine on too. Can you guys hear me?
Excellent. Terrific. Tom, it's such a pleasure to have you here, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come to speak with us. And I have a lot of questions for you, and it's been a challenge to limit them to a few. But I want to start off by talking about you started Farallon Capital, one of the largest hedge funds in the world, as well as Hellman and Friedman, one of the largest private equity funds in the world, and you pioneered this absolute returns investment. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means?
Sure. So let me start by saying thank you for coming. It's my great pleasure always to come to universities and talk to people who are slightly younger than I am. Genuinely, because you guys know a lot of stuff that I don't know. Maybe I know a little bit more about absolute return investing than you do, though. Basically, the idea of absolute return investing is to try and invest in something that has the risk of a bond and the return of an equity. So we would basically say, if we can invest for a 20% return with very limited downside, we'll do it in anything. And we probably did 20 different things. You know, we kept coming up with new things that fit that. So for instance, for several years, we were the biggest independent film financiers in the world. And you'd think, that sounds like a really terrible idea. Which is why it was a very good return, actually, because everybody thought it was a terrible idea. And we had a little box. And I told the people, I don't want to hear what you think about movies. This is an investment thing, no softcore porn, no violence, everything else we finance. And we were the biggest in the world for years because we had a way of understanding how to do that in an absolute return way. Our biggest investors were endowments and foundations, so schools and nonprofits. And I did that for 27 years. And at Hellman and Friedman, which was basically this will sound insane, the first private equity firm to focus on whether the companies that you were purchasing and running were actually good businesses. Which, like, of course you'd think that would be important, but in Wall Street, private equity started as basically a financial thing. You buy 10 companies, you lever them all up. If it works, you make 10 times your money. If you lose your money. And if it's 50-50, you make 5 times your money. That was sort of the depth of their thinking. And at H&F, the idea was, let's build some really great companies, which at the time was a new idea. Strange as it may seem, I think now everybody's sort of cottoned onto that. But I'd say, the last thing I'll say is this, look, there is a way to do these things in a really great way, where you feel like you're doing things that are really positive. And there's a way to do this in a way that's really destructive, where basically you think you're going to make a lot of money by making worse products, charging more, and firing people. And it's important at the end of the day, in the middle of the day, and at the beginning of the day, to decide which of those you're doing.
Terrific, thank you. And you walked away from that and dedicated your life to climate activism. What led to that transition?
So if you have a two-dimensional view of people in finance, that will seem strange, because it's definitely the worst economic decision I've ever made in my life by a large factor. But let me say this. First of all, I'd worked in Alaska before I went to Stanford Business School. I love the out of doors. I wanted my family to see what North America looked like before the Europeans showed up. So I took them to Alaska in 2006 to say, look at all these fish, birds, mammals. This is what, an amazing North America looked like when it was super rich in all the natural wonders. And which was true, but it was also true you could see it was melting. And it was really obvious. We live in California, and we were sitting there, and we literally went to a place that had been a gigantic glacier, and it was all gone. So we went back to San Francisco and sat around the kitchen table and said, obviously something's happening, maybe something we could work on. What do you guys think? And we decided, sure, this is something the United States can solve. It's kind of like it's technology, it's understanding the natural world, it's figuring out new products and ways of doing things. Of course, everybody's going to want to do this. So why don't we help them do that? So to me, and then I left those businesses at the end of 2012 because I felt like, look, in spite of the fact that a two-dimensional person would never do this, I would like to have an impactful, positive life. I'm sure you guys do too. I think everybody does. But I felt like that's really important to me. I would like to make a contribution that has nothing to do with money. I would like the United States to do a great job. I would like people here to live better. I would like the natural world to be preserved. And I would like to be part of the army of people making that happen. So at the end of the day, I can think this was a really valuable, wonderful life, and I had a great time and met great people doing it.
Fantastic, thank you. I really enjoyed your book, Cheaper, Faster, Better, How We'll Win the Climate War. What I loved about it is that it's relentlessly optimistic. It's incredibly optimistic about the fact that we have the ability as humans to pull together and take action on climate change, and that if we actually make the decision to do that, we're going to win. We're going to succeed on this. That was written in 2024, a bestseller, I might add.
A great Christmas present, may I point out?
Yes, absolutely.
One that your cousins will really appreciate.
Yeah, all my cousins are getting it. That was 2024. The world has changed an awful lot since then. How are you seeing things now?
So the world has changed in a lot of ways, but the economics haven't changed. And I think the original introduction was solar was the most expensive energy source 10 years ago. It's the cheapest energy source in the world now. Last year, over 90% of new electricity generation in the world was renewable. Honestly, the electrification of the planet is happening no matter what. And that is not because people are nice. It's because it's cheaper, faster, better. And the reason I wrote the book was because I think the environmental movement, which we can discuss what that means, but the environmental movement was about doing the right thing for everybody. Collective action, morality, decency, blah, blah, blah. This is about no, 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 no. This is the best thing you can do for you. That not doing this is dumb. And in fact, that's what we're seeing around the world, that people are choosing to do this because it's cheaper, faster, better. And the electrification, it is unstoppable. It doesn't matter what the President of the United States says, literally. He can't make fossil fuels cheaper than renewables. Can't do it. And so if you're looking at where the world is going, there are parts of this transition that are going to go slower that really have to do with molecules. But if it has to do with electrons, it is over. And let's take a step back even from that. There is an incredibly close correlation. I'm sure you guys, I'm a little nervous about what I'm just boring you with because you already know this stuff. So I will apologize for boring you with stuff you already know. Incredibly close correlation between prosperity and energy. Incredibly close, going back to 1800. The countries that have energy get richer. And it's very tightly correlated, and it's true today. So being on the right side of energy in this world has been the number one thing. So it started with coal in England. Lo and behold, they're the richest country in the world. It's been fossil fuels, dominated predominantly by the United States of America. We're the richest country in the world. If you look at oil production in the world, it's somewhere about 102 million barrels a day, maybe 105. We produce 13.5 million barrels a day. The next biggest producer, Saudi Arabia, produces between 8 and 9. We're the biggest. We're the highest cost. But if you look where the world is going, it is clearly going to renewables. It is clearly going to electricity. And being on the right side of that is going to be whoever's going to dominate from an economic standpoint going forward. So what I was trying to say in my book was this: why don't we just win? Why don't we do the smart thing and win, which, by the way, is the good thing. But we don't need to ask people to be nice. We just need to ask people to be self-interested, because that's something that everybody responds to. And if you look around the globe, they're doing it in droves. And we tend to look at this. It's the last thing I'll say. I'll make a shorter answer, so I do want to hear questions. Look, we look at this from the standpoint of the United States of America, which is not comparable to other countries. So we look at it like there's 2% growth of electricity per year, and it's really about data centers and AI. And everybody's freaking out. That is not how the rest of the world looks at this. Most of the world is not building AI. In a lot of the world, they don't have electricity. So if you look at India, India will have 5 times as much electricity in 2050 as now. Some of that will be for AI, but a lot of that will be just for people who don't have electricity. If you look at the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, 100 million people, 10 million have electricity. 90 million don't have any electricity in their house. That's going to happen. So when we think about the world, the way we think about it, it's a 2% growth. That's nothing. How about 5 times as much electricity in 25 years? That's something in a country of 1.4 billion people. So when we're looking at this world, we see it, we think everybody's in our spot. Hardly anybody's in our spot. This world is changing really fast. And we're not the people who are going to drive this outcome on a global basis. It'll be China, India, Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam, and maybe in the 30s and 40s, Africa. That's the way this world's going.
Couple of things that makes me think of. First of all, where does that leave American competitiveness given the political situation right now and some of the decisions that we're making as Americans?
Well, we also can't repeal the laws of economics here. Because if we could, no one would be allowed to do anything that isn't powered by fossil fuels. The question is going to be, we are still going to be, I sincerely hope, the technological leaders in this world. If you look at AI, 60% of AI, not to be a chauvinist, is in Northern California, in the world. If you look, what is the University of Michigan about? Look, this is about really well-educated people innovating at the very edge of change in the world. And that's what the United States really does, actually. We innovate at the edge of change. Is that going to continue? Yes, absolutely it's going to continue. Is it going to continue as broadly and quickly and deeply as it should? That's a real question, Charlene. If there's no money for research, it goes research development. If there's no research, there's no development. And so very much, if you look at last year, half of the growth in the United States was AI investment. If you think it doesn't matter, it totally matters. If you look at what's going to drive it, we are either going to be on the edge, pushing the envelope, innovating, starting up, creating, or we're not going to grow. That's the truth, and it's going to be a much worse world. So from my standpoint, is that a critical function? Yes. That's something we do at our company Galvanize, that I've supported in universities pretty much since I got out of university, and which, look, from my standpoint, I'll give you an example. What is the United States going to do about oil? Okay. What is the United States going to do about oil? Because we've been opening up all the leases, people can bid on the leases, and we're doing all these things to support oil. Oil this morning was at $63 a barrel. I don't know how closely you guys follow that. Probably not as closely as I do. $63 a barrel. Marginal cost of oil in the Permian Basin in Texas, which is the biggest oil production basin in the United States by far, $60. People can't really drill at 60 to make 63. Marginal cost of oil in the Persian Gulf, $10. They make a lot of money at $50. They make a lot of money at $40. We're the high cost producer in the world. 60% of oil usage in the world is transportation. You have to ask yourselves, okay, which is going to win, internal combustion engines or EVs? I can tell you this, Chinese EV makers are building factories all over the world. The US internal combustion car manufacturers are retreating to North America. So when you think about what's going on in terms of transportation, it's really clear electrification is unstoppable. The other 40% of usage is plastics and chemicals. That's the growth area for oil and gas, plastics and chemicals. If you're reading the studies on plastics and chemicals, it doesn't make you feel too good. So when you look at this from just a straight up business, no morality, it's just a question of what's going to happen, where the revenue is going to come from, where the margin is going to come from, where's the return going to come from. To me, it's like, really? This is a hard question? You want to be the high cost producer in a commodity, all of which the demand for all of which is challenged? Wow. I wouldn't make that bet, personally.
Not a good investment decision.
It really isn't.
No. So that brings up a different question, and that is lots of the business case for sustainability has never been stronger. As you say, it's cheaper, faster, better. But there are a number of things that perhaps we need to do that may not be cheaper or faster, although arguably they're better. I'm thinking of biodiversity. I'm thinking of social justice, things along those lines. Yeah. And how do you see that in with your investment thesis here, your ideas about these things? How do we give priority to things like biodiversity?
So, let me say this. I was not an econ major in college. I was an econ poli-sci major in college. And I did that because I was really interested in what kind of systems worked. And the way that I think about that relationship between politics and economics is basically do not trust business people to decide what's right and wrong. Ever. Because even if they're telling themselves they're doing the right thing, they will always be thinking about their bottom line. The reason that I believe in democracy is because I believe in dispersed decision making. I believe in everyone having a voice. I believe in justice. And so if we don't have all of those things, then the people who write the framework for the way that the economics work will always be tilting it in their own interest. And that is a disaster for justice. And biodiversity is a perfect example. Are we in the sixth extinction? I don't know how many of you guys have read that book. I did read it. It's been around for quite a while. But I think extinction is happening at something like 10,000 times faster than normal. So that people think this is the sixth great extinction, like the dinosaurs. That is not something that it's easy to put into an economic model. I mean, one of the nice things, if you can believe it, about global warming is it's pretty easy to put into an economic model. There's pollution, there's the cost of pollution, you can measure the pollution, you can charge for it. It's kind of like you don't need to be a genius to figure out how to make the playing field flat. And if we did that, I'd be fine with everything. It's very hard to think that way about diversity. It's very hard to think that way about justice. And that's why literally we need dispersed just decision making as a society that everybody gets a voice in, so that in fact the rules of the road are fair. And so, look, the rules of the road about oil and gas are we don't have to pay for our pollution. Everybody else has to pay for our pollution, and there's no such thing as a carbon tax. Okay, maybe there's no such thing as a carbon tax. That's what everybody always says. There's no such thing as a carbon tax. Really? Why don't you tell the people in Pacific Palisades who lost their houses there's no such thing as a carbon tax? I think they paid the carbon tax. I think you should ask the little girls who died in Texas in the floods. There's no carbon tax? Really? I sort of think you and your families paid the carbon tax. It's just completely random. And we see it only in American terms, but if you look around the world, the impacts of places where they don't have the kind of physical protection because they don't have the money to build the adaptation and the physical protection is much worse than here. And so there's no carbon tax, there's no cost to pollution. Really? There's definitely cost to pollution. Massive cost. It's just completely random, and it's not assigned to the people who are profiting from it. It's assigned to some unknown person in Pakistan who either dies in a flood or loses everything they ever had in a flood.
And I think increasingly we're paying it ourselves as we breathe in smoke from forest fires and all kinds of things. So yeah, excellent point. Tom, in your book you talk about some friends, some former associates from the investment world that maybe are less than aware about climate change and maybe less than interested about climate change as well. What do we need to do? Because as you argue, capitalism is a critical mechanism for addressing climate change. What do we need to do to get those people on side?
So let me just talk about capitalism for 1 second, and then I want to say what to get them on side. So look, capitalism really works. I really believe in capitalism. It is incredibly effective, it is incredibly efficient, and it really focuses people's minds. But it is amoral. There is no morality. There's no immorality. It's not by definition bad. It's just not by definition good. And if you doubt me, think back to all the things that were legal in American history that people did to make money. And you can, I mean, it's not a great group. You don't have to go very far to figure out that when they change the rules to do anything, people will employ a 12-year-old for a 14-hour day and pay him a quarter if they can get away with it. They did that, and that's by not even close to the worst thing we've done in terms of the American private market. So we've had a civil war over what the rules are about capitalism. And however, if you want to drive change, the two things that drive change are government rules and profit. Profit really drives change. And so I really believe in capitalism in terms of getting things done. That is really an effective tool. Now let's talk about capitalists. I think it's hilarious that people are saying, these greedy capitalists, suddenly don't care about climate. It's like, capitalists are greedy by definition. This is not news. And I had a friend, so it's 2012, so that's 13 years ago. It was like literally the month before the superstorm Sandy that flooded New York City, flooded the subway system, all this stuff. So this guy comes to see me who is, let's see how fancy he was. He went to Harvard Business School, he worked at Goldman Sachs, he was on the board of the Harvard Endowment, he ran a major hedge fund in the United States. He's from New York, he comes to San Francisco and comes over for a cup of coffee. 2012. So we talk about rates, China, growth, a whole bunch of straight up investment questions. And at the end of half an hour, I said, so what about climate? And he goes, no, I don't care. I said, well, I mean like global climate change. He goes, I don't care. I said, well, like the impact of rising temperature. I'm like throwing this guy underhand softballs. And he goes, Tom, let me be clear. I live on the 16th floor. I have a refrigerator full of food. I think by the time, the floods will never reach the 16th floor. And by the time I've eaten all the food in my refrigerator, I figured they'll fixed it. In other words, I don't care one bit. No interest, totally selfish. What is going to get that guy to care? Money. Honestly, he will do what he thinks is profitable. That's why I said cheaper, faster, better. If he can look and say, okay, we can power that plant with renewables or we can power that plant with natural gas, which one's cheaper and the cheaper one's renewables? He's gonna do renewables, not to be nice, because it's cheaper, faster, and better. And that was the point of my book. We aren't gonna get those people by appealing to their, good thoughts about the rest of humanity. We're just not. And a whole bunch of them are really great people, but they are going to make their money. And if they can make their money and also do something good, better. But the first thing is the first thing. And so that's why I've been pushing. We're at this execution phase where we have to win in the marketplace. We can't just win in the court of public opinion. We have to go out and execute. And that's why I started Galvanize with my old friend Katie Hall. It was because it's like, nah. From now on, no more talk. We have to win.
I'm simultaneously, energized by what you say about we're going to win because of profitability, and also appalled by the sense that greed is the driver of everything.
Well, it isn't. So let me say this, and that's why I was talking about democracy. Self-interest is not everything in this world, and I think if you look at the United States, I can make a strong argument for why the energy transition is inevitable, why electricity is definitely going to win, blah, blah, blah. But it's also true when I think about the United States and for us to really perform as a society, it does come down to something bigger. And that was my point about democracy and justice, is like this country, it seems to me, is missing community, missing vision, missing a sense of what we're trying to do together. And that's been true probably since the Berlin Wall went down. And you can look and see kind of from that point how American society is fractured in many ways. So I am making an economic argument about how to win economically, and I do believe it. But I want to put that argument in the context of something bigger, because obviously there are other things going on in our society that are not going the way that I would choose to have them go. And I feel as if there's something missing, and it is about that. It is about values. It is about shared community. It is about a purpose to life. It is about what is this country, which was always has been a leader about democracy, freedom, justice. When did we stop thinking that that was part of being an American? I mean, it's always, since the Declaration of Independence, that's been part of being an American. When did we walk away from that? And so from my standpoint, unless we, in fact, rebuild that sense of purpose and community and values, then, yeah, we're going to have a lot of problems even doing, an economic framework that's fair, just, and is going to succeed broadly. So I said econ poli sci. Yeah. We need to win in the marketplace, but winning in the marketplace is not the answer for our society. It's part of the answer. But the bigger answer is an ability for us to talk again about what America means and what it means to be an American.
Absolutely. Hear, hear. I want to then take a slightly different direction, but building in on that idea of business and government and society. You talk in your book about the importance of measurement, about getting measurement right. And we're seeing with the European rules, the CSRD, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, we're seeing other jurisdictions putting rules in place that are making companies all over the place have to measure their ESG performance, look at their impact on society as well as society's impact on them. What we're hearing from our ERP partners is that they're so hamstrung by trying to figure out how to measure all this stuff that they feel like they can't get anything done. So, I mean, this is a little bit of positive whining too, because they're also happy that there's some attention to this. But we also see that metrics differ a lot by jurisdiction. Is there any relief in sight? Can you shed a little more light on how you feel about measurement given these conundrums?
So, if famously, Mike Bloomberg, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. I mean, one of the nice things about capitalism is we know what we're measuring, so we're managing to the measure, which is known as money. And if I think the hardest thing, which I was indirectly saying about biodiversity, is it's hard to measure, and therefore it's hard to manage to it, it's hard to charge. So, but one of the things that is increasingly possible to do is actually measurement of emissions. And so I don't know how much familiarity you guys have with what's going on in satellite-based measurement and climate trace. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this nonprofit, which was partially started by Al Gore, but which basically I think is measuring emissions from something like 600 million sources in the world. Every plant, every ship. It's amazing. So the ability to actually measure is something which, look, this is something the United States knows how to do. Software, measurement, satellites, yeah, we're good at those things. So when people say it's hard to do, well, yeah, it's hard to do. There are a lot of things that are hard to do in this world that we do. And, we have great IT in this world, and this is something we can definitely do. And we can definitely do it pretty cheaply. There's a lot, I could get into a lot of complications around this, but basically what I would say is we can definitely do it. It's not that hard. It's not that expensive. Business people always say it's impossible before they do it. That's absolute mantra. I try to ignore that as much as I possibly can. And I think that the real question is, we are used to polluting for free. People like to pollute for free. If you look at the fossil fuel industry, there are 42 billion tons of CO2 roughly emitted per year. Just accept that. People use different estimates, but just assume that. 3/4 of them come from fossil fuels. So roughly 30 billion tons. Think about how much a ton of CO2 is worth. There are a bunch of markets in this world, and it ranges from like $30 to $100. The Biden administration was worth $190 a ton, but let's just take $100 because it's a round number. That's $3 trillion a year of profit. If you're paying $100, if that was the damage done by a ton of CO2, $100, that would be subsidizing fossil fuels by $3 trillion of profits a year. Just so you know, that's a lot of money. If the people in this room were getting that money, we would not give it up easily. We would have a million excuses for why it was not a good idea for us to pay that tax. We'd have, in fact, 3 trillion reasons. So when we think about measurement and we think about, it's absolutely critical for us to be able to measure this, because it's absolutely critical for people to put it into their spreadsheets and say, which is cheaper, natural gas or renewables? Which is, all the things. And then it just becomes, we're done. It's just a cost. And if you think about, we can do sequestration And it's like, what's going to cost to sequester? What's it going to cost to use the different things? Put it in a computer program all over the world. We're done. That's how capitalism works. Well, but as long as people are being subsidized by $3 trillion a year of free money, it's pretty hard to get a level playing field. And we're winning on a tilted playing field. That's the point. If you know, to a very large extent, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. If you can't measure it, you can't put it in your spreadsheet. If you can't put it in your spreadsheet, you don't use it for decision making. Got to measure it.
Makes sense. I'm going to turn to a question that maybe relates to a lot of the people in this room. You talk in your book about insider-outsider activists and the importance of people going into major corporations and pushing for change on climate change. We have a lot of people in this room that are quite interested in that. And I'm just wondering if you could talk about what are some of the risks and opportunities they face, and maybe if you have some advice for them to be effective and resilient insider-outsider activists.
So here, I would say two things, and I'm no expert on this, but I would say two things. And I want to go back to something that's happening right now, which is how the different law firms are relating to this administration. So basically, the administration has basically said to a bunch of the big law firms, you know, you're not doing, I don't even know what they're complaining about, to be honest, but they're complaining. And they want them to pay huge, you know, do lots of pro bono work for them and pay money and all these other things, just the way it was that they're doing with universities. And some of the law firms have succumbed to the pressure, and some of the law firms have said, no, we'll see you in court. So from your standpoint, assuming you were law students, which you're not, it would seem to me that it would be very hard to go to a law firm that is going to go along with something that's antithetical to what you believe and try and convince them to change. They will change, actually, because the facts of the matter are they're going to have to change. But you can be roadkill along the way, and who wants to be roadkill, really? It's very unpleasant. You'd spend your time at risk, and honestly, they'd probably shoot you. So it seems to me the way to think about being an insider is you should be pushing for better things for the place you're working, for them. Selfishly, I'm making the point, we should be moving towards better things. But I also think it's really hard to push against people who don't want to do it and who are in control. And they don't, you know, they're not going to like you for that. And I don't think it's worth it, to be honest. My attitude is, would I go to one of the law firms that, you know, basically rolled over? No, I wouldn't, because I'd feel like, you know what, those guys are not going to like me. When I raise my voice, they're going to dislike me, and somehow that's not going to work out. So I would think it's really hard to make the people in control change their mind because you're so much smarter. I mean, it's really hard to walk into some place and say, I'm smarter than you, let me explain what you should be doing, when they think they're smarter and they've done it for 20 years or 40 years and they don't want to hear it. So that's what I would say. Push the stuff that's better for them, for the people you're working for, the organization, and do it in an organization that can hear. And I'll give you one last, I was talking to a friend of mine who is running a AI-based business to do back office for banks and insurance companies. And he was saying it's really hard to get people to change. It's a much better deal. They'd save millions of dollars. It's better for their customers. It's really hard to get people to change. And that's when you're basically giving them free money. So I think when you think about these institutions, they're slow to move. They're successful. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And so I would not go into a hostile environment thinking that it would be a great idea to spend the rest of my life pushing against a bunch of people who are going to dislike me for pushing and probably not going to do what I wanted. Sorry.
Yeah. Lots of frustration there. Yeah. Well, I want to, for my last question, before we turn it over to some questions from the audience, I want to throw you a softball, maybe a more fun question, to talk about Galvanize and what's exciting there.
So we have a bunch of different strategies, basically saying let's let the wave of the energy transition push our returns. Let us be hopefully the smartest in the world about this, but let's try and think of a bunch of different investment ideas, all of which are around decarbonization, but which are, the investment world has its own categories. Let's try and fill up those categories in ways where we think we'll outperform and get better returns. So we're telling people, you should do this for the money, but by the way, you'll also be doing something that has real impact from a decarbonization standpoint. So let me give you a very simple idea, which honestly I love. Basically, we have been buying warehouses. And warehouses are a pretty basic thing. But the other thing about warehouses is they have flat roofs. And you know what flat roofs can do? They can hold solar. And so basically, we have been looking for places in the United States where you can decarbonize by 150%, really reduce your energy usage through a bunch of things that are not exactly rocket science. Also put solar on the roof in the places where it both generates electricity and you can sell it in ways that are profitable. And actually the returns are, from a risk-reward standpoint, spectacularly good. No one else, believe it or not, is doing that in the United States of America. And I'll give you two things that make this better just from an investment standpoint. One is that 2% of additional electricity demand coming from AI every year actually is pushing up electricity prices in the United States by a lot more than 2%. So in fact, if you can be a generator of electricity, that is something that is getting increasingly valuable and increasingly scarce. So supply and demand is in your favor, but that also means pricing's in your favor, and maybe the way that the structure of electricity in the United States is going is in your favor. So that's one thing that's a good thing, that is not in anybody's number. Well, it's in people's numbers, but in very muted ways, I think. The second thing is this. I don't know how many of you guys have worked in a warehouse. I'm going to guess a very small number. And no one wants to work in warehouses now, just so you know. And it's not a terrible hourly wage, if you think about it. But the way that warehouses work, it's a terrible job because of the structure of when you get to work and how much you have to wait to work and how you don't get paid for the hours that you're waiting to get a call. And so actually, if you look at it, if you looked through it on an annual basis, you'd realize it's not a good job, and everyone's figuring that out. So people don't want to work in warehouses, just like people don't like to work in the fields. You know, there's a dearth of people in the United States who want to work as migrant farm workers. So what does that mean from the standpoint of investing in warehouses? So if you don't have human beings, what's going on is they're being replaced in the better warehouses by robots. Like, that's what Amazon is doing. That's what Prologis, which is the biggest warehouse company in the world, is doing. Something that robots need, you probably had not thought about, is electricity, which means the actual electricity use of a warehouse is going up 5 to 8x. So if you're producing electricity, that electricity just in your own facility is getting much, much more valuable. So when we think, so to me, it's like, okay, we're going to decarbonize these things by 150%. We're going to make our investors very, very good money. We can make returns in real estate that you should never get for buying a full warehouse at half of replacement costs in an infill place. That just should never, no one should be getting those returns for that risk, which is a good thing for us. And ultimately, if people see us do it, they'll all want to do it, which means that actually the built environment, which is one of the 6 big verticals around decarbonization, 80% of these buildings are going to be in use in 2050. We're going to have to decarbonize. We have to show people that it's profitable. Like my friend who lives on the 16th floor, does he care? No. Does he care if we're making twice as much money as him? Yes. And that's the point we have to make is, look, this is a good thing to do because it's smart. It also happens to be decarbonizing by 150%, which we really need to do.
I love the circularity of it as well, thinking in terms of the system and how do we
It's got to
put
be
the
because
pieces together.
it's almost impossible. Ultimately, we have to change the way we think. Because if we change the way, that's why I'm saying if it gets into people's computer programs, we win. Because that's changing the way people think. There's nobody, you know, there are trillions of dollars of real estate in the United States of America. I'm pretty sure we won't be running trillions of dollars of real estate in 2050. And that's what it would take for us to make the difference. But what we can make a difference in is show people that what happens, grow, profits scale because people do what's profitable. And they sit there and go like, no, I'm not gonna do this stupid thing. I'm gonna, like, after they look and see that their friends are doing it and they're outperforming them, and they go like, okay, he's an idiot. If he can do it, certainly I can do it. And then they do it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for answering my questions. And now I want to open it up a little bit. I have some pre-arranged questions that people submitted from the audience. Do I have Meg Haggerty here? Meg, do you want to ask your question? Sure. Okay, great. Do we have a mic? Story? Yes, I have the...
I remember it. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, great.
It's pretty short. My question was, what climate technologies are you most excited about, and which ones do you think are overhyped?
So God, there are a lot of really great technologies out there. Let me talk about one area where I think something's underappreciated and something's overhyped, which is sequestration. And so the normal way of thinking is that we're gonna, by 2050, we're gonna decarbonize by 75%, and we're gonna sequester 25%. That we'll still be producing 25% of current emissions, and that we will then suck that out of the sky and stick it into the ground in one way, shape, or form. And the question has always been, there's been a big dramatic breakdown between whether we're gonna do that in direct air capture, so mechanical stuff, where we're basically gonna have machines that suck the CO2 out of the ground, put it in a pipeline, send it to some kind of rock formation or old oil well, and stick it under the ground. And that is something which the United States government has supported with billions of dollars, that the oil industry thinks is a great idea, and blah, blah, blah. And then there's a bunch of natural world sequestration, which is we're gonna do a variety of things: enhanced rock weathering, regen ag, sequestering in the oceans. There's about 4 or 5 technologies that are gigaton-sized technologies. But the ones that are most famous are growing trees and not cutting down trees. And growing trees and not cutting down trees has been debunked to a very large extent by The Guardian. And The Guardian is probably the #1 place if you want to read about the need for climate response. Is probably the #1 place to read about that is The Guardian. So the fact that they're saying 80% of natural world sequestration is BS has been a dramatic trouble for anybody in that business. Because people feel like, and there was a ton of BS, and the example I always give is, they paid the Bohemian Grove $2 million not to cut down the Bohemian Grove. It's like, you could have charged them $2 million and they wouldn't have cut down the Bohemian Grove. You didn't need to pay them not to cut it down. So those are the two big, if you divided up sequestration, those would be the 2 big areas. So to me, I look at it and I go like, sequestration, it's a lot about, is it real? Is it permanent? Is it measurable? What's it cost? So if you look at direct air capture, it's real, it's permanent, you can measure it, it's incredibly expensive, it's irrelevant. It doesn't scale. So they would say they're at $300 a ton, they're probably at $600 a ton. To put that in context, $100 a ton is $1 per gallon of gas. That's the tax. So at $600 a ton, are we gonna be paying $6 a ton, a gallon of tax for sequestration? I'm gonna go with no. That's out of this world. It also doesn't scale. If you think about it conceptually, we'd have to build a whole new mechanical system to do this that is as big as the original system of oil and gas. We'd have to rebuild that system. Some people say multiple times over. Are we gonna do that? No. That to me is overhyped. Too expensive. We don't believe, look, I believe in cost curves. I believe driving down cost curves. I don't believe in this cost curve. I don't believe that we can get to the place that they say they can get to, which is $130 a ton. Okay, now let's talk about the natural world, which has been debunked by The Guardian, and The Guardian, we all know, is sincerely interested in actually doing the right thing around climate response. Look, we think there's really good MRV that's being developed. I said earlier, we really believe in the ability of the United States technological world to do measurement, to do information technology, to do all the things that's going to be necessary. We believe a big part of this actually will revolve around machine learning and AI. And we believe the MRV is either there, pretty damn close, or will be there. We are not worried about MRV, the ability to actually measure this. So what is the cost and what is the size? Look, we think that these are going to be below $50 a ton, some of them way below. So that's less than 50 cents a gallon. We think that some of these have secondary order. You know, if you think about DAC, everything that it does that's not sequestering carbon is bad. Everything. In the natural world, pretty much everything that is the secondary order effect is good. And so, depending on how you value that, whether you include it or don't, these are really cheap. And I believe that if you went, look, we think in the United States that oil companies have an attitude towards climate, which is there ain't no such thing as climate. And don't talk to me about climate. And we're never gonna do anything. The future is oil and gas, and there's no such thing as climate change. Okay, if you go to other countries and their oil companies, none of them say that. If you go to Kuwait, they don't say that. If you go to Saudi, they don't say that. If you go to the UAE, if any place, they don't say that. And so do I believe that there are people who would right now buy measurable, provable sequestration at a reasonable price in gigantic size? Yes. Absolutely. No question in my mind. And I'm not guessing. So, I mean, the words at a reasonable price, that's subject to negotiation, right? What that means. But so in answer to your question, I look at this as a perfect example. There's data here. You have to make some assumptions about technology, but it's not incredibly hard to do. Then there's a question about getting it done, which is building the businesses, building the relationships, actually turning what's true in the lab into a scalable business. But I'm sitting here thinking about it, there's a company out of Yale, one of my old friends from the Yale investment office, turned to sequestration full-time, retired from the investment office to seek different ways of sequestration where you take wastewater and take CO2 out of the wastewater in an existing wastewater plant that saves the wastewater plant a ton of money and actually sequesters carbon in a very measurable way. It's kind of like, okay, these are not people who adopt new technologies easily, but it's going to save them an awful lot of money, and it's measurable, sequestrable carbon. So when I look at this, and we could go through every one of these, heat pumps, EVs, in every one of these, it's a business. There's a real question about what it's going to take to get people in a wastewater business to actually want to do something new, but it's going to save them an awful lot of money. And if you're getting paid for the carbon credits, somewhere in there is something that's around zero. That's a real thing. And so when we look at heat pumps, it's like, yeah, it's really better. It's a new way of thinking, but if you spend any time thinking about it, it's like, okay, that's way better. And I once sold water heaters door to door. I know what it takes to sell someone. It's hard.
Fantastic. Okay, and we have.
That was too long an answer. I apologize, Meg.
It was a great question, a great answer. Timmy Rabb. Yeah.
Oh, no.
Can I give you your question? And yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Is this the first time you've seen it?
This is the first time. Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts about the trade-offs between global economic competition and global environmental collaboration, and particularly with China.
So, Timmy and I actually know each other. This is why I feel absolutely free to harass him as much as I possibly can. And I want you to know that that's a hard question. So let's talk about it for a second, because obviously for the world to really work environmentally, we need to cooperate. If we want to have border adjustments, if we want to have trade include this, that's something where cooperation is a million times better than enforcing it at the border in all these painful ways, and we can see it. And at the same time, we're obviously, I think the only thing that the people in Washington can agree on is how much they dislike China. And to be fair, I'm not a big fan of communism, just so you guys know. Because I said I like dispersed decision making. I like everybody in this room to get to vote democratically. I like everybody in this room to get to vote economically. So you get to decide what to do with your money, and you get to decide to do what your vote, and that's not how communism works on either side. Having said which, if there's anybody in the world who is pushing climate response in a way that is good for all of us, it is China. If you look at who's building the solar panels, who's building the wind turbines, who's pushing on batteries, who's leading the world in EVs, I'm sure you guys all know, $20,000 will buy you an amazing EV in China. $10,000 will buy you a car that you would definitely like. That's why they're building plants all over the world. A lot of these companies are going to go bankrupt, just to be clear. But in the meantime, the cost of EVs is going down 1% a month in China. And they're doing something that is truly amazing. So the question is, should we be cooperating with them on environmental stuff? Yes, dramatically yes. Are we having huge arguments with them about how to cooperate economically? Yes. And so there's this conflict around how are we going to cooperate economically on environmental things, which we need to do if we can't cooperate with them economically on everything. How do you draw the line on this? It's a conundrum. From my standpoint, ultimately, politics pushes economics in the short run, and in the long run, economics pushes politics. And so if we decide that what we're going to do is not, and let me say, it's cooperation, it's also competition. I always say, if you want to be a good basketball player, play basketball against good basketball players. If you think you can be a good basketball player and never play against good basketball players, my answer to you is, you don't know a lot about basketball. And I say the same in business. If you're not competing with the best, you ain't going to be the best. If we want to do a good job, we're going to have to be willing to compete with the best. And so to a very large extent, I'm not a big believer in trying to draw a fence around yourself economically, because I think it's just like saying I'm only going to play basketball in a gated community. Only the people in our community get to play in our basketball games. It's like, really? How is that working for you? Not well, I'm going to go with. And that's what I'm going to say about look, we're in Michigan. Center of the American car business. If you want to compete, you're going to have to compete with everybody in the world. And that's fine with me. Because actually, if you see what's driving Chinese car companies, it's actually software. And so, just so you guys know, we're the best at software. Like, if that's the thing that we're going to compete on, let's compete. And if we're going to do new age manufacturing, yeah, we can do that. We can lead in new age manufacturing. We're not going to win. I hate saying this, but it's true. Even in Michigan, we're not going to win with Henry Ford's assembly line in the 21st century. That was 1908 or something. This is 2025. If we want to win, we're going to have to be innovating on a constant basis and competing on a constant basis. And do I believe all the things that people say about China stealing intellectual property? Yes. Closing their markets to American products? Yes. Of course I know that. And the question is, yeah, that is a huge problem. We're playing basketball against someone who's elbowing us in the throat. Okay, I got that. But we're going to have to compete. And so to my mind, we're going to have to compete, and we're going to have to try and enforce some fairness in that competition. And that's not a trivial task, and it's proved to be very hard for the United States to figure out how to get that duality. But in my mind, if we don't get that duality and we choose not to compete, we lose. We lose. And if I started by saying the correlation between energy, leading the world in energy, and being the most powerful, important country in the world, not going to change. So if we decide not to compete in this, let's not go to the Olympics in basketball. That's my answer.
Thank you. Jackson Phillips. Okay. Oh, you got the question. Okay, great.
I'm a senior, so I'm at that point in my life where I'm trying to navigate my career and choose what I want to do. And I know you started your career in something non-environment and have shifted. I have spent a lot of time looking for jobs that kind of combine that investment role with impact. And there's not a lot, especially at the early career levels. So if you had to give a piece of advice for someone who wants to enter that space, for a young professional, what would you tell them?
So this is what I would say, Jackson. I would do the thing that I love doing. Because you know what? It turns out it's your life. And if what you think you want to do is finance, I would do finance. I would try and do it in the best way I could, but I would think I'm going to get my competitive capabilities and my network and my framework set at the outset. And I think, I'm really answering you. I wouldn't go to work for true SOBs. I really wouldn't, because I think you're going to learn the wrong things. I think at the outset, the most important thing is what you're learning, not what you're getting paid. And I would try and find the people who you think are the best so you can be the best, so you can decide what to do. My opinion about finance after, this sounds incredibly arrogant, so I'll apologize. After 2 years at Morgan Stanley, 2 years at Stanford Business School, 2 years at Goldman Sachs, my attitude was, yeah, I'm through learning. There's a million things to learn, but I don't need you guys to teach me anymore. I'll just learn on my own from here on out. And I think maybe I was wrong and maybe I was early, but you definitely, at some point you have to be like, no. Now I have my own opinion and I can push and I can decide how to push. But I think until you get to that point, it's really hard. And so my attitude would be, if you want to be in this area, you can't do impact up front. You can do impact when you can push. So I'd say get yourself in a position where you can push. That's honest. And I would do the thing, I would not push for impact. I'd push for what you really love and or care about and do, and then do impact. That's what I did. But I think it's too early. You can't really get people to do what you want until you know what it is, how to do what you want, if that makes sense. So, and I always say to people, you're not retiring from your first job. I would bet probably no one in this room will take one job for their whole life. So it really is about, there's a famous story where Warren Buffett went to work for his finance professor at Columbia Business School, Ben Graham. And so he's sitting there the first day and he's doing these big spreadsheets and he's not getting paid anything. So he's doing it because he thinks he can learn from the best investor in the United States, Ben Graham. And so Ben Graham looks at Warren, who's doing these spreadsheets, and he goes, Warren, you're dramatically overpaid. And he goes, yes, I do. That's my thinking about jobs. It's really about, did Warren get screwed by working for Ben Graham? No, he was dramatically overpaid over the long run.
Interesting. Benedict. No? Oh, sorry. Not here. Linda Sun. Come on. Luca Silvera? There. Okay, terrific. Yes, coming with the microphone. Rebecca's on her way.
So my question is, our generation super eager to work on solutions that matter. We're super inspired by talks like yours. But at times, climate tech can feel somewhat overwhelming in scope and just how general it can be. What advice would you give us on narrowing focus and identifying our skills and which ones can actually move the needle?
So, Luca, what I would say is sort of what I said to Jackson. Don't worry too much about the big picture up front. Think about what your skills are and where you can get good at something. And when you get good at something, then you can think about impact. And I'll give you a, obviously not a relevant point. Let's say what you really love to do was write scripts. So you want to write film scripts or, I guess, whatever kind of TV scripts, whatever it is. I would say get good at writing scripts, because then you can figure out how you want to move the needle and what you want to write the scripts about. But first get good at it so that in fact you have an ability to move the needle, and then you can worry about how to do it. And I would say again, do the stuff you really love. I mean, it's still your life. This is supposed to be something, most people like to do what they're good at. Do the things you're good at that you really enjoy, because that's where you'll be appreciated. And then when you really feel like, okay, I've got my feet on the ground, I know some stuff, I know how to do this, I can really push. But I think you're in a much better position focusing on that, where you're building your own, you're basically investing in yourself, and you're building your capabilities, and then you use your capabilities. But first you got to develop them and get credibility. But also, there's stuff to learn, believe it or not, in this world.
Terrific. Janine Coelho? There. Thank you.
Hi, so you mentioned that financing the clean energy transition has picked up the pace in recent years. However, there have been significant setbacks as well. So where do you see the greatest bottlenecks right now, and how should capital be deployed most effectively to unlock that systemic change?
So obviously the biggest bottleneck I think you're referring to indirectly is basically trying to undo the Inflation Reduction Act. So they've taken away a lot of the incentives for renewables in the United States, and then there have been some additional things that I do want to talk about, but let's start just with the Inflation Reduction Act. So taking away the ITC, it makes doing a lot of renewables less attractive, so people are pushing really hard to do renewables as fast as possible because they basically just put a time limit on it. What does that really mean? Look, if solar went down 90% in the last decade and it's going down another 90% this decade, do we really need subsidies? I mean, at some point you're supposed to be making the money without the subsidies. The oil and gas business may get $3 trillion a year of free pollution, but the point is the lines have crossed. So when I look at that, and we did an analysis, okay, what happens without the ITC when we're basically doing solar on the roof in these warehouses? The answer was probably better for us. Like, there's a way to do it now with some certainty, blah, 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 get some of the money up front, blah, 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 probably a worse return for us over time. So when we look at this, we're like, this is gonna have to be driven. Like, this is a political bottleneck, okay? And those, it's really about deployment and driving down the cost curve, and we think that's gonna happen no matter what, and it should happen no matter what. The real issue about bottlenecks in my mind is, well, why did solar go down 90%? Like, there's no law written in heaven that says solar is going to go down 90%. How did that happen? There's a relationship in solar between, I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with Moore's Law. You guys know what Moore's Law is? Okay, so basically in solar, the equivalent of Moore's Law is every time you double the installed base of solar globally, the price of solar goes down 24%. That's the equivalent of Moore's Law. And since there's so much solar being deployed around the world, we're doubling pretty, at a fairly rapid clip, which means the price is going down on a constant basis. The issue is, how did we ever get to that kind of deployment where the prices could cross, where people in the DRC or Pakistan or Kenya are suddenly just buying solar panels? And the answer is, China put a lot of government money into driving down the cost of a solar panel. And Germany put a lot of money into paying people to deploy solar energy. So two governments made the decision. And by the way, they're using American technology for the whole thing. But so there was, and which we spent a lot of, not the equivalent amount of money, but a lot of money supporting that technology in universities like this one. So when we look about how did that happen to get there, when I think about the bottlenecks, they're not the ones that are here now about deployment. They're the ones in the future where how are we going to get the money to do the research, which is basically a government function, and then are we going to have the kind of support from governments to push through the cost curves where they cross and you get into the traditional S curve of, technology adoption, which has been true of every technology, for as long as there's been a technology, where it's like, it's not really crossing the curve, but some people are buying it across the curve, and it just goes basically straight up to about 80% of the market, and then it flattens out again because some people stay with the old technology. So in answer to your question, to me the question here is going to be about new technologies, not existing technologies in deployment. For most of the existing technologies, we're kind of there. The issue is going to be in some of the new stuff like hydrogen. Things that you can see can happen, you can believe in cost curves, you can understand how that could happen. But basically, to get from here to here, there's a lot of investment money that has to go into that, and people have got to be willing to make it. And a lot of times that's government money.
Fantastic. We have time for one more relatively short question, open to the audience. Any, Akshaya?
Thanks so much for being here. So I'm a strategy PhD student, and in theories about value creation.
Oh, we're going to use the mic. Yeah.
So I'm a strategy PhD student. Charlene's my advisor. In our theories on strategy, we generally assume that value creation is about profit and efficiency, and there's this other separate world of human flourishing, which is about well-being and dignity. How can we change our theories in order to increase the overlap between those two circles? And where is the overlap?
So I'm going to think about that as I rephrase it, if you don't mind. Basically, the question was, value creation is about profits. Profits are not the same as human well-being. How do we actually make those two things go together? Honestly, that is sadly the role of broad-based societal rules. And so let's talk about some things that are economic rules and some things that are not economic rules. Well-being. If we, look, people's health is much better because there are rules saying that everybody has a right to the following health deals, Medicare. So therefore, as a result of that, there are a bunch of people who are trying to make profits by providing the health care that is necessary for people in the United States over the age of 65, and that's just a rule. And that didn't used to be a rule. Maybe it won't be a rule going forward. But that is a place where you basically changed the framework of economics and gave people a huge incentive to serve the tens of millions of Americans over 65, and where you're going to get paid by the government for basically meeting their healthcare needs. And that would be the idea which I was describing of a carbon tax, of border adjustments, of any of the things to say, basically, if you pollute, we're going to put a value, the cost of your pollution, we're going to put a number on it, and you're going to pay everybody that number. And once you're paid, then that's full cost accounting. And now well-being is taken care of, and we have the ability to make better decisions as a society through a market mechanism. Okay, then there's the non-market mechanism. So for instance, one of the things that some people believe in, and I think I'm one of those people, it probably would be good for the United States if everybody did some service for the United States. And not because we'd pay them a ton of money, but because it'd probably be good for all of us if we did something for the United States and met everybody else in the United States, so that we're not as separated as we are, and so that, in fact, we did some buy-in, but also so that we learned a lot about people from different parts of the country and different parts of the socioeconomic strata. That'd probably be great for us, and I think that that's something that has nothing to do with profits and has everything to do with values. And so in answer to your question, I don't believe that values come from capitalism. I don't. I believe that that's how you drive change and get things done in the most effective way. But I believe that values come from the broadest based decision making with everybody having the same voice so that people can be heard. And I think that, in one man's opinion, look, the reason people are so pissed in this country is to a large extent because they think that the political system hasn't responded to them and doesn't care about them and really only cares about the people with the money who've perverted the political system. And there's a huge amount of anger in this country from every part of the political spectrum about that fact. A feeling of like, wow, this doesn't respond to me. The people making political decisions are listening to moneyed interests that are in effect self-interested. So when I talk about, look, for us to, it is very hard to believe, I think this is a several centuries old idea, that having dramatic, gross inequality is consistent with having a true democracy. It's really hard to believe that. And we have dramatic, look, I'm from a state that produces a lot of it, but it's really hard to believe that dramatic, gross inequality is something that's consistent with people's trust in democracy.
On that note.
Okay, now I don't want to end on that. Let me say this. The history of the United States is something about disruption and coming up with new ideas. Rebirth. And you don't get rebirth without disruption. So I'm not, I mean, Charlene was saying I'm optimistic. I'm 100% optimistic. We are going through disruption. But, you know, I'm a huge believer in Americans on both sides of the political spectrum. I'm a huge believer in the American people. I believe that, in fact, we are fantastic. And I believe that disruption will lead to rebirth in the best way. And we need it. We really need it. And the idea that what was going on before this was so perfect is not true. We need rebirth. And we need to come in to deal with the realities of our system and the lives that Americans are leading and how they look forward and how they feel about their kids. And if we don't do that, then shame on us. I have no sympathy. I have total sympathy for the idea that we need to actually get down and dirty and talk about what's going on at a human level across this society and try and use democracy to answer it. I'm very, very optimistic that we can do that. Do I think that will be pretty? I'm pretty sure it's not going to be pretty. But, you know, we have a messy system. We're a messy people. We're loud and rude. I love it. That's democracy, loud and rude. I'm good with that.
Well, in times of disruption, it's the people that can tell an appealing story that can galvanize response, that actually get people to rebirth in a really nice way. So I'm very glad that you're here to tell us your story today. And I really appreciate your optimism, your faith in the American people, and your commitment to both capitalism and values. And thank you so much for being here today. Thank you all for being here with us today. My understanding is that Tom has a few minutes to stick around afterwards, but only a few. So if you want to speak to him, now would be the time. But please join me in thanking Tom Steyer for a very inspiring.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys.